Welcome to, here it is, guys, after 3 years, I'm going to say it again, welcome to the Jesus Culture, not just podcast, but the Jesus Culture Leadership Podcast, or as we affectionately say it,
the JCLP.
The JCLP, for all those that listened to JCLP years ago. Here we are, 3-year hiatus. You were looking at it. October 2021 was the last time we did this podcast.
And we didn't even say bye. We weren't like, hey, guys, we're taking a break. We just said, we'll see you next time.
Hey, to be fair, a lot's happened in 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, to be fair, there was a lot going on in 2021.
I think they deserve an explanation.
They feel abandoned. Feel abandoned. Well, first, let me just say, if you're joining us for the first time, we've had what was the Jesus Culture Leadership Podcast, and then we changed it to Jesus Culture Podcast to try to kind of make everybody feel welcome.
Yeah.
And then we've decided, you know what, it's the Jesus Culture Leadership Podcast.
It's the JCLP.
We're going JCLP.
It always has been. It always will be.
Always has been. Always. It's never changed in our heart. And it's funny, you're not into sports, so you won't get this. But when they name an arena,
it's like nothing changed.
They name an arena, and then they just, or the Sears Tower, different ones,
yes.
maybe that would be. Then they change the name. I refuse to go with the new name.
Oh, yeah.
The
Sears Tower. I'm from that area.
Yes.
It's like now the John Hancock building.
Yeah,
What is that?
Sorry, it's the Sears Tower. So this will always be the JCLP. And if you're new with us, we've been doing a podcast for a long time. Podcasts are in right now, though. Everybody's got a podcast.
They are.
Chic? What's the word I'm looking for? They're
very trendy.
They're in vogue? Is that
Oh, no, don't say it.
Don't say that. I don't even know what I'm saying. But they're trendy. They're all over the place. But we've been doing a podcast for 15 years. We need to go back and go, when was the first one? It was 15, 20 years ago.
You're like the original influencer. You're like the guy that's like, I had this first. I did that. You didn't. I mean...
I'm not sure when 52 people listen to your podcast, if that's the definition of influencer, but I get your point.
Yeah.
So we're back. We've been on hiatus. Why have we been on hiatus?
Because so the JCLP has been a part of people's lives, at least 10 or 15. We know, people feel they've grown up with us.
Can we just stop real quick? Because this is... this was, how you just write a joke out for as long as you can, and it's just still funny,
yeah.
And maybe it's not, but to us it is.
So true.
Early on, we just talked about, hey, for all of you joining us around the world, and there's at least 52 of you, and we randomly just said 52, where there's at least 52 of you listening.
Yeah.
And there were more. Like there was thousands of people listening to the podcast, but we were like kind of self-deprecating,
yes.
joking. And it just stuck. And all of a sudden, people would be like, I still to this day have people come up to me and go like, I'm one of the 52.
We were in the UK this summer at
Yes.
Pastors Conference UK, which we'll talk about. But a guy from Minnesota, youth pastor from Minnesota, was there in the UK randomly.
Who lives in the UK now.
Yes. Ran up to me and said, I'm one of the 52. I've never met this man. We haven't even been podcasting for 3 years, which we will talk about why. And said, I'm one of the 52. Instantly, I'm not a huggy person. And I'm also not, I don't necessarily like you. Right off the bat.
Yeah,
this
it's
is
actually
so bad.
you actually dislike. Yeah,
No.
you actually dislike the person first.
No, I don't dislike them.
Is that?
You just kind of start at zero with me.
No, you don't start at zero. You start at negative. But I get your point. Keep going.
And,
I love your positivity about zero.
But when you say I'm one of the 52, I hug
We're
this
friends.
man. I hug this
We're
man
friends.
I don't know.
We have
I said we're
a
friends.
history.
We're family.
We've been through something together.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So one of the 52. And the story I always tell is we actually had a guy, probably a 19-year-old kid, picked me up. He was an intern at church. I was speaking somewhere at a church right in the middle of our podcast. And again, I podcasts or whatever, but there was thousands of people listening from all over. But we always joked about there's 52 of you listening.
Yeah.
And so I get in the car. And he's driving me, and he just said, hey, I listened to the podcast. I said, oh, that's great. He goes, hey, man, I just want to encourage you. I know that there's only 50 listening right now, but I really think God's going to do something with it. I really think it's going to grow. Like this kid was like really trying to encourage
I love
me.
that so
I just
much.
said, thanks, man. I appreciate that. That means a lot.
If you're listening out there somewhere, your prayers, they mattered. So
we're back, and I feel like you maybe need to take a moment because your feelings have been hurt for 3 years.
Well, yeah.
Your feelings have been hurt.
As
you
have
feel like there's
thousands of
another
others.
kid that came into the yeah. You're like this is how you are. You're like the kid that was you have your first child and they're 5 years old. The world's revolved around them. Like nothing else has been going on in the universe besides you. And then all of a sudden, parents decide to have another kid.
Well, yeah.
And all of a sudden, that 5-year-old's not happy about it, feels jealous,
Do you know why
hurt.
that's such a great analogy? Is because it's actually true. It's almost literal. So we do a podcast for years, mind you.
That is impactful and successful and changing people's lives.
The JCLP.
You wouldn't know it from
JCP,
this first part of the conversation
the
right now.
Jesus Culture podcast. In 2021, we're trucking along. We make it through the worst of COVID.
No, there was still more, but...
And we did a podcast. We brought in Phil Manginelli, who's a great friend, a great host. And I was invited to do the weekly podcast like I had been doing for 10, 15 years. Come on, Becky, let's record a conversation with John Tyson. Wow, he's a hero. I love John Tyson. Are you kidding? Me and Phil and John. There's been no talk of, hey, we're actually not going to be, this is the last one.
What?
This is the
We didn't know that, to be fair.
Well,
I didn't know there was another kid
you'll
coming.
stand before God one day. And so we film, we record, we have a great conversation about his book, The Intentional Father. It was like yesterday. I'm just taken back to that moment. Phil and I had a gripping conversation. I bought John Tyson's book, The Intentional Father. My husband and I read it. And little did I know that day in October, that fateful day in 2021.
We would take it in the backyard and shoot it.
It would be the last podcast because you had a passion burning in your heart for another podcast called The Pastor's Podcast.
Yes.
And in the midst of COVID, and you were busy,
which is done quite
and
well.
you were struggling, whatever, and you were discouraged. You seemed to pump out 7 seasons with some of the most phenomenal guests and one of the best produced podcasts we have. And
now we're back with the lower one.
I'm just in my office wondering, wow, I don't know what I did wrong. I'm a pastor. Hey, I'm a pastor. Do you need me on the pastor's podcast?
So you can see why the 5-year-old is upset that there was a new baby born. But we're back. We're back to putting attention on where we need to put attention. Because we made it through. Listen, if you've listened to Pastor's Podcast, which I'm sure you haven't,
it's awesome.
You'll know that we were pretty open and honest in there. It was a pretty crazy few years for sure. But we got a call of God on our lives.
Yes.
We honestly, this is the truth right now in regards to why we would be back. It's interesting. We're hitting our 25-year anniversary mark for Jesus Culture, which we kind of just place it on our first conference. So we did our first conference in 1999. And so September, we're doing our 25-year anniversary, 10 years for the church in Sacramento. And what's interesting is I've been kind of reflecting back and going back over, man, those early days and what our vision was and our passion, what the mandate was, what the words were over us. And I'm like, gosh, we're the exact same. Like, we haven't really changed much. We're not pointed at teenagers. We are. There's an incredible movement. Awakening's happening right now. Thousands of young people. But we're not just solely pointed at teenagers. We're pointed at the larger body of Christ. But we still have the same burning passion. And that burning passion, this is the only reason I do a podcast. The burning passion is, one, I want to see revival in the earth. I want to see a move of God. I want to see a harvest. I want to see cities transformed and spheres. But I believe in order to see that happen, we've got to see believers that are raised up, living and acting like leaders and revivalists. And I just am convinced that people, I feel we have 2 mandates really. There's more mandates, but one, we've got to come alongside people and help them fully engage the call of God on their life. So we've talked about this. There's 2 parts to the call of God, a call to be and a call to do. God's called you to be someone, and he's called you to do something, to partner with him in the earth, in his plans and purposes. And I believe that when people are fully engaged in the call of God in their life, that's when they're most fulfilled, most thriving, most flourishing, most alive. And then I believe when that happens, that's when we're going to see revival. So this is our simple way of trying to jump in on just encourage people.
Absolutely.
It was always so simple. Like, it wasn't real complicated what we were doing before.
Yeah. And we called it the Leadership Podcast because of what you're saying. We believe everybody is called to lead. And so it was cool. We kind of for years gave that title to people, and it was amazing. In all seriousness, the testimonies and emails and texts and messages that would come through, people listening to the podcast. There's this gal, I'm connected with her. She lives in Illinois, part of the Vineyard Church movement, an incredible her and her husband are incredible. They're up and coming leaders in the church. She was an intern at the church, and she was just doing janitorial work. At 17, her life getting transformed. And she said she would pop in her headphones while she was at the church after hours, listening to the JCLP. She said, and you guys gave me permission to lead. permission to lead, and just the content, the people we were bringing in, that call to be a leader wherever you were. Not necessarily, because you have the title, but you're a leader because God has called you to lead and to be who he's called you to be and do. And now her and her husband, she just emailed me. She's stayed in touch. I actually got to fly out there a couple of years ago and meet them. Her and her husband have now been chosen to lead like the regional youth movement.
Amazing.
For the Vineyard, and they are seeing an incredible outpouring. And the podcast has been a major part of their journey. Do you
think that they could trace the start of all of that to the podcast?
Absolutely.
That's actually incredible.
It is.
It's those type of stories that we just want to come alongside people, encourage them, whatever it is. For me, I have the same philosophy. If you read a book I wrote, if you come to the church, if you hear a sermon, if you're in our culture, if you listen to a podcast, hopefully the result's same, that you fall more in love with Jesus, that you're stirred to take ownership of the call of God on your life, and you go out and change the world, and then you do it relationally and in community. And
in the last 3 years, and as Banning's been, active in podcast world, just with a new podcast, which the Pastor's Podcast is great.
The Pastor's Podcast has been so good.
It's great, especially there's a couple that I'm on that just wow.
Yes, they just really. We did let you in a little bit.
But, as we've just sat and, like you said, we're reflecting on what Jesus culture has been and what it is. This is like, we can't stop doing this. Yeah. People still need to be encouraged and equipped. And we would always say, we just want to be a cheerleader. It's like in your ears, like you go, you're doing awesome, challenge you, equip you. So we're excited for another season of doing that. We will not. There's no hiatus. Hiatus is over.
Hiatus is over. And also, we were doing like only monthly or something back then. We're going weekly. And here's why we're going weekly. Here's why I decided let's go weekly. Because after 3 years, I have a lot more things I want to talk about. And
You're mad about a lot more things.
And a lot of opinions. It's going to be a lot more opinions. A lot's happened in 3 years with you.
Yes. So
lots changed. So what's transitioned? And then I have a question for you after this. But you've transitioned your roles.
Yes.
In 3 years.
So on the podcast, the JCLP, I went from, I don't even know what I was when we started. I think I was a admin, honestly.
No, you were leading the creative department.
I don't know that I was leading at the time. I think probably anyway, went from not even just being in the creative department for the movement to being our youth pastor when we planted the church, and then youth pastor.
Drowning is the youth pastor.
It was just 8 years of you making fun of me and me sharing my woes, and that was awesome. Then I became a mom on the podcast. This has been my reality TV show.
Yes, totally.
Just growing up in front of people. In the last 3 years, in 2022, I stepped into the role of executive pastor of our church here
Which is
locally.
more like senior associate pastor. So many people, when they run into you, it's funny how much we just make up titles. I've realized recently we just make up titles in churches.
100%.
It's not even biblical titles. They're not anti-biblical, but they're just kind of like, I don't know, lead pastor, senior pastor. But so we put executive
outreach.
pastor, which just pretty much you're running all things church.
Yes.
It's probably more senior associate pastor, although we don't use that title. Let me ask this question. So you left kicking and screaming.
Youth ministry. I went in kicking and screaming, and I left kicking and screaming.
Which is a good sign. You went into youth ministry kicking and screaming. You left youth ministry kicking and screaming. Tell me right now, it's been 2.5 years.
Yeah.
2.5 years. The number one leadership lesson you've learned here on the JCLP of stepping into the role you're in right now in the last 2.5 years, number one leadership lesson you've learned. Let me ask this. What surprised you the most about stepping into this level of leadership, and what's the number one lesson you've learned?
Oh my gosh, that is a weighty question. What first comes to mind, and I'm sure if I sat on this longer, I'd have something more sophisticated. Profound. Yes. In 30 minutes, I'm going to go, I wish I would have said this. I think, but context. Actually, I have been learning the value of context as a leader. And what I mean by that, especially for me, I am a very black and white person. So I struggle with gray. And gray is context. Like there is context to every decision that when you are not the leader or you're not at a higher level, you have context that other people don't have. So as youth pastor, I just lacked context to so many decisions. Why are we doing that? What is going on here? Because I could only see my context in youth. And so I'm frustrated, or I'm, ignorant, or I'm just, struggling sometimes to understand the full picture. And then when I don't know if every youth pastor is like this, or I just thought I knew the right answer to everything. They should do this. I had all of these opinions about what should be done. from leadership that I'm sitting here. I went, oh my gosh, the importance of context, how every decision it just cannot be black and white. There's very little room for black and white.
It's way more layered. It's way more nuanced.
Yes.
It's way more complex.
Yes.
It feels very simple. It feels very black and white when you're younger and on the outside looking in.
Yes, and when you're not involved at a higher level. And so now which is beautiful. I said the first 6 months of executive pastor, I just wanted to call Zach, who was the executive pastor when I was youth pastor, and just apologize. I just wanted to apologize. I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. So now I'm able to coach young leaders that feel maybe frustrated or, wondering about decisions being made, that there's just context they don't know. And then for leaders who are at my level to remember, you got to get the context. You got to get a lot of more information before you can make decisions. You got to be aware of that info, how layered it is, and get really comfortable with the gray. Which is a whole nother conversation.
It is hands down for me, one of the biggest things from being a young leader to an older leader now is the world's way more gray than I thought. And both of us are pretty opinionated. Both of us are we're sharp and we're opinionated, and we have an idea of how things should be run. And so when I am a younger leader, I'm going like, this isn't that complicated. Just do that, fire that person. Don't let that happen. Do that. Yes. And then as you get older, it's not morally gray and it's not theologically gray. Yep. I'm not talking about gray in morality or theology, but like situations and relationships and information and
people. It's
complex.
Like
it's way more gray.
Yes.
The consequences to a decision that I would have never, well, just do that. Well, I have no idea the consequences to that decision.
Exactly.
So the unknowns and things like that is pretty interesting.
And if you fight the gray, which I think I spent a good chunk of time trying to fight it, and I actually tried to come in pretty black and white, and realizing, that's just not going to work. It's not sustainable. You can't fight that complexity. You have to lean into it, embrace it, lean on the Holy Spirit, like all those kinds of things. So it's been for me a journey of loving the gray.
So here's one of the things I would say for young leaders in particular is lots of times arrogance pops up in our life because we look at the older leaders and say, well, this is what's going on and this is what they should do. But the younger leaders have never been in their shoes. So I was with a guy, he was on staff at a church, and he was only part-time, and they couldn't pay him full-time. And he was so frustrated with the pastor because he was convinced that the pastor doesn't talk more about giving because he's got the fear man on him. And he's like, we've got the fear man. And if he didn't have fear man, he'd talk more about this and that type of stuff. And it was interesting because I thought, he may have the fear of man, but it's a lot more complicated. Well, one, you don't know that for sure, but it's a lot more complicated when you're the actual senior pastor, having to stand up in front of a congregation, having to figure out. And so when you're younger looking at it, you just want to go, well, this is what it is. That's the fear of man is what that is. And you need to talk about it more. And I'm like, it's just so like, you gotta get rid of some of that stuff because it's so arrogant sometimes to go, I would never do that.
100%.
I'm like, well, I'm not sure you know what you would do. Hopefully you'd make the right decision.
I mean, this is parenting, right? You see with your kids, you're like, why don't my parent? And then you become a parent, you go, oh my gosh, there's so much context there.
You're in some restaurant, you're like, why don't they just get control of their kids? This isn't that hard. Like, just parent your kids until you're the parent.
And it's so funny. I remember years ago, being at some non-ministry position at Jesus Culture. We brought in Dan Fairley from Bethel to do a talk on communication and leadership, and he used Stephen Covey's example from the book Seven Habits.
Seek first to understand. And
the kids on the bus who were acting out, and and I heard that at 21, and I thought, that is so good. I'm going to carry that with me.
What a great lesson I just took.
And here I am at 36 now going, oh, I get it.
I have less patience for this nowadays in that, people might come when I don't have teenagers now, but when my kids were teenagers, they might have an issue with what my girls are wearing or whatever else. And I just thought, okay, you either have never had teenagers or you're arrogant.
It's true.
Either way, go away. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and it's not, or I find this all the time when people are frustrated. I get on planes and people are just so irritated that a parent has a baby and the baby's crying. And I'm like, how do you expect them to go visit their family? One, do you want them to drive the whole thing? But second, either you've never had kids or you're arrogant.
Yeah.
Or
you have no idea what's the circumstance, I think. And honestly, that Stephen Covey thing, if you don't know it, there's these kids are acting out on a bus.
On a train,
On a train, right. And the dad is not really doing anything about it. He's trying, the passenger is like, wow, why doesn't he get control of his kids? And they're just disturbing everybody. And finally, somebody says something, hey, get hold of your kids. And he goes, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Their mom just died.
Yeah, we're just now leaving the hospital. They lost their mom.
They just lost their mom. And just, it's so sobering. But I carry that with me. Yeah. I'm like, you know what? I don't know the context of this person. And so, I mean, that's it's an intense example, but you almost need to get there because it is so easy to think, to assume, to go black and white mentality. I think, especially if you feel that call to lead, you're probably driven, dominant personality, opinionated, or whatever. So,
well, here's another lesson I would tell leaders is, or in life in general. So when I say leaders, relationships, whatever else, go in asking questions.
Yeah.
When we assume we know exactly what's going on, when we assume we know all of the details, all of the motives, like I think as leaders, we have to be very good. I have some leaders in my life that I love dearly, but it's funny, man. They'll just roll in and not ask questions at first.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? What's going on there? Don't do that. And I'm like, hey, there's a lot of context that you need right now. If you would just ask some questions, you'd get some more information and then be able to actually approach the situation a little bit better than you are.
It's so true, actually. That, like, for anybody listening is going, it's simple. Like when you said that, it's just simple. Just ask questions. You don't really need to read a whole book or get a whole leadership. Just ask questions. Why?
So
ask why.
Come in and go, hey, listen, I might have an opinion on something. I might have an opinion on what you're doing, as you're leading the church and doing things like, but I'll go in like, if I think I know, rather than just going, hey, tell me a little bit more what you're doing there. Mm-hmm. Well, we have this meeting, we have this conversation, we thought through this, we did this, and we came to the conclusion. You think, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Rather than just assuming stuff.
So true.
Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions.
Which is hard to say without talking about humility because that requires so much humility. My other thought when you said, what are you learning? I thought, oh gosh, it's so humbling. Leadership is so humbling if you let it really wound you the right way. And I just think the best leaders are humble leaders. You have to be humble to ask questions, assume you don't know. If I was being really raw and honest, leadership lessons I'm learning, I'm like, I don't know anything.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know anything. And this has been such a humbling process in over your head and just realizing, oh my gosh, what I thought I know, I don't know. But I think, I'm like, that's where the good stuff's coming. That's where the good stuff is coming out of. And I'm actually becoming a better leader the more that I accept that I don't know. And I think as leaders, you can feel the pressure to have it all together, to know it all, and so it is that fine line of like, you don't want to be, what is it? You don't want to be lacking confidence in a way that you're not strong to lead, but that line of, humility, I think is really important, which could be a whole nother, again, talk.
So gray is what is the biggest lesson you've learned and the most surprising thing?
I would say the most surprising thing is honestly how little I had thought.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny right now. You're like, the most surprising thing is I thought I knew everything.
That's so bad.
And I was very surprised that I didn't.
Since it's only 52 people, I will say that.
That's amazing.
I literally took this thinking, how
hard can this be?
And I had some reverence, like, oh, this is a big step. Okay, let's do this. I'm going to learn something. But I jumped in and I would come home every day to my husband. I'm like, I don't know anything. How the heck did I get this far in life? I don't know anything. I need to learn so much. And it drove me I'm listening to sermons like I've never listened. I'm reading books like I've never read books. I'm asking questions. I'm getting input. I feel like I got a whole nother round of just like schooling and realizing, oh man, I need to grow.
Ultimately, leadership is about people, whether it's about, if you build a team to accomplish something, it's about people. If you're trying to move a vision forward, it's about people. You're trying to
Motivating.
get people. Is one of the biggest things that I learned early on was I remember just thinking, like, it's just people. So leadership is like, I'd be like, I got a clear vision. I'm yelling charge. I'm going there. And halfway there, I turn around and look and nobody's with me. Because leadership is about moving people. Leadership is about connecting people. Leadership's about
Yeah,
getting
absolutely.
people to work together or whatever.
Yeah.
And so people are so complex. And they are so complicated and layered and emotional and broken and
Yes.
dysfunctional.
Yes.
Even when there's some areas that are functional, other areas aren't. When there's some areas that are, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So that's when you very quickly find out, like, oh, if this was just something on paper, I've got this.
Or if I didn't need people.
If I didn't need people, if I could just be by myself on an island, I'd have this whole thing organized. We'd be moving forward. It'd be great. We'd accomplish everything we want to accomplish. But I actually have to get people to do that.
Yeah.
And people are complicated.
And Jesus was so good with people.
So
Jesus was so good.
Yeah.
You read, I'm like, oh, Jesus, this is what he knew. This is what he knew.
He was stern where he needed to be stern. He was
Yes.
very kind when he needed to be kind. He was patient. He was the whole thing. Yes.
Question asker. I was just reading in the Gospels the other day, and so funny that you said that. I kind of made a little margin like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how many questions Jesus asked constantly. Just questions. We have a good model, I guess, to learn from.
Yeah, there we go. So the surprise was you don't know everything. That's amazing that's what surprised you.
I'm just being honest. Can we edit that?
No, that's amazing. What surprised you the most? The fact that I didn't know everything about leadership. That's what surprised me the
That's
most.
going to inspire someone.
That's going to inspire
Someone out
somebody
there.
somewhere to go, wow, I'm actually doing better than I thought I was, because that's not the thing that I'm surprised by in life at all. Well, we are going to be, this is just the welcome back and intro, but there's going to be a lot of stuff we're talking about every week.
We'll have guests on here.
What we're really going to do is just have the conversations we have off the mic.
Yeah.
So church hurt conversations and leadership conversations
Yeah.
and influence
Yes.
conversations and
Yep.
women in leadership conversations
Yes.
and
Social media.
theology questions and
Yes.
Bible conversations.
Someone asked one of the girls helping promote stuff. She goes, "What's the podcast going to be about?" I'm just like, everything,
Everything.
just everything. And is it leadership specific? Like, well, yeah, because you're called to lead. That's kind of where that came from. So there are some people. There are a lot of people who refused. They never adopted the JCP. They never adopted that this is the
Jesus Culture
Yeah, they
Podcast,
kept
yeah.
it, just like Sears Tower. The JCLP. So
They're not moving off it at all.
nope. So we'll see who's still with us. If you subscribed, I was thinking, if you subscribe to this podcast, which there are legitimately
Yes.
thousands of people, like tens of thousands who are subscribed to this channel, we just did not pop up in the RSS feed for 3
Do people
years.
notice though?
I don't know. Every now and then I'll go through my podcast.
You're a pretty diehard podcaster.
I'll unsubscribe from
I don't
things,
actually podcast a lot.
which is, I don't know if you want to be out in these streets saying that. You don't listen to podcasts. You're the social media user who never posts, but you read. Do you know those people? Your wife is the one.
Yeah, oh,
She'll never
she's a
post,
stalker.
and she doesn't like, but then she'll go, "Hey, I saw you posted."
Oh
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh
It's
my
creepy.
gosh.
It's creepy. Like it if you saw it, woman.
Yeah. So
what you
you are
share.
that with podcasts.
Yes, I've listened to podcasts.
Your own.
No.
You love the Bastards podcast.
Yes, it's a whole seasons of life. Seasons of life. Am I right?
I am an avid podcaster. There are some people who listen to all kinds of podcasts. My husband, any kind of podcast. I'm a specific. I can't listen to serial.
Part of why I don't
those
listen
true
to
crime.
podcasts as much is because I guess you'd have to listen. I could listen to them when I drive, but when I'm working, talking's distracting.
Yes.
So Derek's just doing stuff around the house
Yeah.
not around the house, but I'm saying doing
Golfing,
stuff.
mowing the,
all
mowing
that
the
type
lawn.
of
Yeah.
stuff.
And he can listen to stuff.
Yeah, where for me, if I'm having to create something or think about something,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
I for a while read somewhere that if you put on like classical music, that's what you should do because there's no words to
Yeah.
it. It's so I tried that for a season. It didn't last real long.
I don't know. When I walk into your office, it's like
It's all 80s,
like 80s,
music.
like
yes.
it's like your high school.
Yeah, it has to be stuff I can zone out on. I do like Spotify
I don't ever
for the
hear
80s.
Mozart. Let me just tell the people
Well,
right now.
that doesn't happen. And then I was
There's no
in a whole
Beethoven.
kick of like while I was like preparing sermons and working and trying to write, and then I was on a kick of like Mozart was too much. So then I went into like movie soundtracks.
Oh my gosh.
So you'd come in and be like Braveheart playing and Gladiator and all these like
You've embraced, we'd say you're in your dad rock era.
oh, I'm in my dad nerd era for
Yeah.
sure.
So you're just,
No, I moved away from it. I've always been a dad in the dad nerd era, probably. So we're gonna have all these conversations right now. Off the top of your head, what's the hot topic that you think we should be talking about?
Church hurt. We were talking about it. We were talking about it offline.
We probably need a whole thing on this, but it's because you just got fired up by reading an article.
I read an article about why church hurt doesn't exist. Here's a teaser. If we ever get to it, it says church hurt doesn't exist because baseball hurt doesn't exist. And that makes me giggle.
Yeah, it is actually an interesting thing. This is what we've said for years around, listen, church doesn't hurt you, people hurt you. And they hurt you in the and that's real.
That's real.
People betray you and people hurt you and people cause pain and people are wrong. And that happens in a church context, but it happens in like my son, it happens in a basketball context too. It happens
Coach was unkind to him.
It happens in a work context. It happens in a family context. It happens in a school context. But it's very interesting. People in high school that had a tough experience don't say, I have school hurt.
Yeah. Sorry, it makes me laugh because it's true.
Yeah, at some level. And I think it's actually been used. I think that concept of what's happened is, and we need to have a whole podcast on this, the church hurt conversation, which people will push back on. We need to be validating the fact that people have really experienced spiritual abuse, and I'm with all that type of stuff. But it's painted now, I don't need to connect with church because church is what hurt me.
Right.
But we've talked about this, that you cannot define an entire group of people by one experience. Yeah. I said, I remember my whole family got food poisoning at a restaurant, at a Mexican restaurant, a restaurant we loved, food poisoning. I mean, it was projectile vomiting for 2 days, all 5 of us in a dark house. We were just puking everywhere. It was so horrible. But I didn't get done with that and go, I am never eating again.
Right.
I'm never going to another restaurant and I'll never eat again.
Right.
Because of that experience. Now, I didn't go back to that restaurant, even though I could have, honestly, and it would have been fine. But like that restaurant kind of like, I don't know about, I want to go to that restaurant. But I didn't abandon Mexican food. I didn't abandon food. I didn't abandon restaurants because we know, of course, that one experience doesn't define an entire genre of restaurants and food. And so sometimes I think it is something that we hide behind, where I've been hurt by people in the context of church. Therefore, I don't go to church. Therefore, I don't connect with people. Therefore, I don't whatever.
And I villainize the church now. And I think it is worth saying because it's actual. There's a whole group right now culturally this is their agenda. They're pushing this narrative. And so I'm going to talk about that. I want to talk about narcissism. That is everywhere right now.
Narcissism. The fact that we're even using the word narcissism. I'm going to talk about the fact that people call narcissists who don't even know what narcissism is.
Thank you.
We're going to have that conversation.
I'm going to make people mad about that.
Here's one thing. Here, are we just going to talk about what irritates us?
Yeah.
When we begin to say that's narcissistic, I just want to go, I'm sorry, are you like a trained psychologist? Can you give me the definition? Can you give me the definition of narcissism? Because if you can't, don't say that.
Also, it's extremely rare.
Yes.
It's extremely rare. And so I think there's just some things happening
that
culturally.
Feels selfish. That feels like, let's use it. Yes, totally.
Yeah.
There's all these trigger words that are out there now. We're going to do this on the podcast. We're going to go after trigger words. We're going to go after all this type of stuff.
As our listener count really is going to go to 52.
Yeah, it sounds
52 unnarcissistic people, though.
That's totally what it's going to be. So we're going to have that conversation, and ultimately our heart really is just to come alongside you. We want to come alongside people that are out there saying, hey, we want to grow. We want to make a difference for Jesus. We want to grow in a relationship with God. We want to all that type of stuff.
Absolutely. So it's going to be good. So subscribe, resubscribe, jump back on. We're excited. We're back.
Yeah, we're back.
This is real.
3 years.
Let's just say we have also attempted a couple times to come back, but you definitely, you weren't ready.
I had another kid.
Yeah.
Like you're asking me to jump back in. I had another kid that was doing pretty well.
Yeah, so.
Doing pretty well, by the way. Another kid that was fun.
This
I had
is so
another
terrible.
kid that made me happy.
You're triggering people right now.
I had another kid that was pretty fun.
This is going to go on the editing
I had another
floor.
kid that everybody liked.
Nope, we have to cut all this.
Everybody liked the kid. The kid was super fun.
Oh my gosh.
The kid was, across the board. So when you were like, hey, let's go visit that other kid, I'm like, I like this current kid.
Oh my gosh. Please edit all of that out. They're shaking their head. This is triggering some people in the room right now. We've got girls crying. This is just. Guys.
But listen, I eventually circled back and go, I do love this kid. I do love this kid. Let's make this kid exciting.
Oh my gosh. Welcome back to the JCLP, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.